For months, I kept noticing the same pattern appearing across completely different scientific papers, different research teams, different countries, different populations. Yet the conclusions kept pointing in the same direction. Something very simple that millions of people do every morning may quietly be working against their biology after the age of 50. Not dramatically, not in a way you would notice in a single day, but slowly, year after year, influencing hormones, metabolism, and the way cells repair themselves. The surprising part is that the habit itself is not necessarily the problem. In fact, it could become one of the most powerful low-cost health interventions you make in your entire routine. The difference comes down to three small elements that are almost always missing. These elements influence hydration signals, cellular energy pathways, and the internal environment where aging processes accelerate or slow down. And once you understand what happens inside your body during the hours of sleep, the importance of that first moment after waking becomes much clearer. My name is Dr. Michael Evans, and for the past several years, my work has focused on one central question. Why does the human body begin to deteriorate faster after the age of 50, even in people who appear relatively healthy? When you examine the scientific literature closely, the answer is rarely a single cause. Aging is not triggered by one failure in the body, but by many small systems slowly drifting out of balance. What fascinates me most is that many of these changes begin long before disease is ever diagnosed, long before blood tests show a problem, long before symptoms appear. Subtle shifts are already happening in metabolism, hormone regulation, and cellular repair. And sometimes, the interventions that influence these systems are surprisingly simple. Not expensive treatments or complicated therapies, but small adjustments to daily habits that interact with the body's natural biology. Before we go deeper into the science behind this morning protocol, I want to make something very clear. Everything you're about to hear is educational information based on peer-reviewed research. It is not intended to replace personalized medical care. If you have kidney disease, heart disease, cancer, or if you are currently under medical treatment, you should always discuss changes to your routine with your physician. There are situations where some of the interventions we will discuss require modification, and later in this video I will explain those boundaries carefully. But first, to understand why something as simple as your first glass of water in the morning can matter so much, we need to look at what happens inside your body during the hours while you sleep. While you sleep, your body appears quiet on the outside. Your eyes are closed, your muscles are relaxed, and your brain moves through cycles of deep and REM sleep. But internally, an enormous amount of biological activity continues. Hormones shift, cells repair themselves, and multiple regulatory systems work through the night to restore balance for the next day. One of the least discussed processes during sleep is something extremely simple: fluid loss. Over the course of 7 to 8 hours, the human body typically loses between 400 and 800 milliliters of water. This happens through several small mechanisms that add up over time: moisture leaving the lungs as you breathe, minimal perspiration through the skin, and the normal production of urine. Individually, each of these processes seems insignificant, but together they represent nearly 2 full glasses of water lost while you are unconscious. When you wake up in the morning, your body does not interpret this state as mild thirst. Instead, your physiology interprets it as a form of osmotic stress. In simple terms, the concentration of particles in the blood becomes slightly higher because the fluid volume has dropped. Your brain detects this almost immediately. Specialized sensors in the hypothalamus monitor changes in blood osmolarity, and when dehydration is detected even at a mild level, they trigger a hormonal response designed to preserve fluid balance. The first hormone released in this process is vasopressin, also known as antidiuretic hormone. Its primary role is straightforward. It signals the kidneys to retain water rather than excrete it. For decades, this was considered the end of the story. But more recent research suggests that the implications of this response extend much further than simple hydration control. When vasopressin is released in response to dehydration, it performs its primary task efficiently. It tells the kidneys to conserve water. This helps restore fluid balance and prevents excessive loss of water through urine. For a long time, scientists believed this response was simply part of routine hydration regulation, but more recent research has revealed that the story does not end there. Vasopressin is closely connected to another powerful biological system known as the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, often referred to as the body's stress response system. This network regulates the production of cortisol, the hormone that helps the body respond to physical and psychological stress. Under normal conditions, cortisol follows a predictable daily rhythm. It rises naturally in the early morning hours, creating what scientists call the cortisol awakening response. This morning rise in cortisol is not harmful, in fact, it is necessary. It helps mobilize glucose for the brain, increases alertness, and prepares the immune system for the day ahead. The problem appears when overnight dehydration amplifies this response. A recent study examining adults with chronically low fluid intake found that individuals who were less hydrated showed significantly stronger cortisol reactions to stress compared with well-hydrated individuals. Researchers used a standardized laboratory test known as the Trier Social Stress Test, one of the most reliable methods for measuring physiological stress responses. The results suggested something important. Hydration status directly influences how strongly the body activates its stress hormones. This means that when you wake up already dehydrated, the natural morning cortisol peak can become higher and longer lasting than it should be. And that amplified stress signal can influence metabolism, blood sugar regulation, and inflammation before you even eat your first meal of the day. At first glance, a rise in cortisol may not sound alarming. After all, cortisol is a hormone your body needs. Without it, you would struggle to wake up, concentrate, or mobilize energy for the day ahead. The morning cortisol peak is a natural part of human biology and has been studied extensively in chronobiology. When cortisol rises shortly after waking, it performs several useful tasks. It helps release glucose from stored glycogen so the brain has immediate fuel. It increases alertness, preparing the nervous system for activity. It also plays a role in regulating immune readiness for the day. In healthy conditions, this rise is controlled and temporary. Cortisol increases rapidly after waking and then gradually declines as the day progresses. The problem begins when the cortisol response becomes exaggerated. When dehydration from the night combines with the body's natural morning hormone rhythm, the cortisol spike can become stronger and remain elevated for longer than intended. Instead of a short activation signal, the body experiences a prolonged stress response. This shift can influence several metabolic processes. Elevated cortisol can increase morning blood glucose levels, even before any food is consumed. It can activate inflammatory signaling pathways earlier in the day and encourage the breakdown of muscle tissue as an emergency energy source. For adults over 50, the situation becomes even more significant. Research in aging physiology shows that the circadian rhythm of cortisol gradually shifts with age. The peak tends to occur earlier, and the decline happens more slowly. In practical terms, this means older adults may spend more time each morning in a high cortisol state, especially if they begin the day already dehydrated. One of the most important discoveries in aging research over the past 2 decades is that the body's hormonal rhythms slowly shift with age. These changes are subtle at first, but over time they influence metabolism, energy levels, and resilience to stress. Cortisol is one of the hormones most affected by this shift. In younger adults, the cortisol awakening response follows a very specific pattern. Levels rise quickly within the first 30 to 45 minutes after waking, then gradually decline throughout the day. By evening, cortisol is typically low, allowing the body to prepare for sleep and repair. But studies in chronobiology show that this rhythm begins to change after about the 5th decade of life. In many adults over 50, the morning peak of cortisol arrives earlier and remains elevated for longer. Instead of a brief activation signal, the body experiences a longer window of heightened stress signaling. At the same time, the evening decline in cortisol may become less pronounced. This matters because cortisol is not just a stress hormone, it is also a powerful regulator of metabolism. When cortisol stays elevated for longer periods, it can encourage the liver to release additional glucose into the bloodstream. It can stimulate protein breakdown in muscle tissue and amplify inflammatory signaling pathways. Now combine that with the dehydration we discussed earlier. If you begin the day already slightly dehydrated, the hormonal systems responsible for maintaining fluid balance and responding to stress can overlap in ways that intensify the morning cortisol response. But while these hormonal processes are unfolding, Another biological system is quietly active in the background, one that plays a central role in how the body slows the aging process. While the body is responding to dehydration and adjusting hormone levels, another critical process has been taking place throughout the night. This process receives far less attention in routine medical discussions, yet it plays a central role in how the body maintains cellular health over time. This process is known as autophagy. The word autophagy comes from Greek and literally means self-eating, but the term can be misleading. What it actually describes is a sophisticated cellular recycling system. Inside every cell, small structures constantly inspect proteins, mitochondria, and other cellular components for signs of damage or dysfunction. When damaged structures are detected, the cell dismantles them and recycles their building blocks to create new, functional components. In other words, autophagy is the body's internal maintenance and cleanup program. When this system functions efficiently, cells remain healthier for longer periods. Damaged proteins are removed before they accumulate, malfunctioning mitochondria are replaced, and cellular waste does not build up inside tissues. But when autophagy becomes less active, which often happens with aging, the opposite occurs. Cellular debris begins to accumulate, energy production becomes less efficient, and tissues gradually lose their regenerative capacity. What makes this process especially important is that sleep and fasting are two of the strongest natural triggers of autophagy, meaning the hours of sleep are some of the most biologically active repair periods of the entire day. To understand how autophagy is controlled inside the body, we need to look at two biological regulators that act almost like opposing switches inside every cell: AMPK and mTOR. Think of them as signals that tell the cell when to clean and when to build. AMPK, short for AMP-activated protein kinase, functions as the cell's energy sensor. When energy levels are low during fasting, physical activity, or sleep, AMPK becomes activated. When this happens, the cell shifts into a conservation mode. Instead of focusing on growth, it begins repairing and recycling internal components. This is when autophagy becomes most active. mTOR, on the other hand, sends the opposite message. Its full name is the mechanistic target of rapamycin, and it activates when nutrients are abundant, especially glucose, amino acids, and insulin, after a meal. When mTOR turns on, the cell receives a signal that resources are plentiful. Growth processes begin, proteins are synthesized, and cellular construction replaces cellular cleanup. These two systems constantly balance each other. When you eat, mTOR becomes dominant and autophagy slows down. When you fast, AMPK takes control and cellular repair increases. During the night, while you are asleep and not consuming food, your body naturally enters this AMPK dominant state. Autophagy becomes more active, and cells begin removing damaged components accumulated during the day. This is one of the reasons scientists now consider overnight fasting, simply the time between dinner and breakfast, to be an important window for cellular maintenance and metabolic reset. By the time you wake up in the morning, your body has typically spent 7 to 8 hours in a fasted state. During that time, AMPK has gradually become more active, and the cellular cleanup processes associated with autophagy have been running in the background. In biological terms, the early morning hours represent a unique metabolic window. Your cells are still operating in a repair-oriented state. Damaged proteins are being dismantled, malfunctioning mitochondria are being recycled, and cellular components are being rebuilt with greater efficiency. It is a period when the body is naturally focused on maintenance rather than growth. But this window does not stay open for long. The moment you eat breakfast, nutrient signals begin to rise. Glucose enters the bloodstream, insulin increases, and amino acids from food activate the mTOR pathway. Once mTOR becomes dominant, the cell shifts away from repair mode and moves toward growth and construction. Autophagy begins to slow down. For most people, this transition happens within 60 to 90 minutes after waking, depending on when the first meal occurs. That means the early morning period before food is consumed may be one of the most important times for cellular renewal throughout the entire day. What many people do not realize is that the efficiency of this process depends on something surprisingly simple: whether the body has enough magnesium available in circulation. Without adequate magnesium, several of the key biochemical reactions involved in cellular energy regulation and AMPK activation cannot operate at full capacity. And that leads us to one of the most overlooked nutritional deficiencies in adults over 50. Magnesium plays a role in hundreds of biochemical reactions inside the human body. It participates in energy production, nerve signaling, muscle function, and the regulation of blood sugar. But its influence extends even deeper than that. Magnesium is also a required cofactor for many of the enzymes that regulate cellular metabolism, including those involved in the AMPK pathway we just discussed. When magnesium levels are sufficient, AMPK can function properly, cellular energy sensing remains efficient, and processes like autophagy and metabolic regulation proceed as they should. But when magnesium is low, these systems begin to operate less effectively. What makes this particularly concerning is how common magnesium deficiency has become. Data from large nutritional surveys, such as the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, have repeatedly shown that a significant portion of adults fail to meet the recommended intake of magnesium through diet alone. In adults over 50, the likelihood of deficiency tends to increase even further. Several factors contribute to this pattern. As people age, the intestines absorb magnesium less efficiently. At the same time, the kidneys may excrete more of it. In addition, medications commonly used in later life, such as certain diuretics or acid-suppressing drugs, can reduce magnesium levels even more. The result is that many people begin each day without enough magnesium available for the metabolic systems that depend on it. Beyond its role in cellular energy regulation, magnesium has been studied extensively for its influence on overall metabolic health. Researchers have long suspected that low magnesium intake may contribute to conditions such as insulin resistance, high blood pressure, and abdominal obesity. Over the past decade, large-scale studies have begun to confirm that connection. One of the most informative analyses was a meta-analysis published in the journal Nutrients, which examined data from dozens of scientific studies involving tens of thousands of participants. The goal was to understand whether magnesium intake had any measurable relationship with metabolic syndrome, a cluster of risk factors that includes elevated blood glucose, high blood pressure, increased triglycerides, and excess abdominal fat. The findings were remarkably consistent. Individuals with higher magnesium intake showed a significantly lower risk of developing metabolic syndrome compared with those whose magnesium intake was lowest. In several controlled trials included in the analysis, magnesium supplementation was associated with modest improvements in blood pressure, better regulation of fasting glucose, and healthier cholesterol profiles. At first glance, these improvements may appear small, but in population health, even modest changes can translate into meaningful reductions in long-term risk. This is why magnesium is increasingly recognized not simply as a dietary mineral, but as a critical regulator of metabolic stability, especially as the body ages. While hormones and cellular repair processes are unfolding overnight, another organ system is quietly working through the night as well: the kidneys. Most people think of the kidneys simply as filters that remove waste from the blood. That is certainly one of their most important functions. Every minute, the kidneys filter large volumes of blood, removing metabolic waste products and maintaining the balance of fluids and electrolytes in the body. But filtration is only part of their responsibility. The kidneys also play a central role in regulating the body's acid-base balance. Every day, normal metabolism produces acids as a byproduct. Carbon dioxide generated from breathing forms carbonic acid in the bloodstream. Protein metabolism produces additional acids. Physical activity can generate lactic acid. If these acids accumulated without regulation, the body's internal environment would quickly become unstable. To prevent that, the kidneys continuously regenerate and recycle bicarbonate, one of the body's primary buffering molecules. Bicarbonate helps neutralize excess acid and maintain the blood's pH within a narrow, healthy range. As the years pass, however, this buffering system can gradually become less efficient. Even in otherwise healthy adults, the kidneys tend to filter blood slightly more slowly with age. That slow change can increase the body's vulnerability to a condition known as low-grade metabolic acidosis, where the internal acid load slowly rises over time. As kidney filtration gradually slows with age, the body's ability to regenerate bicarbonate and neutralize metabolic acids can also decline. The change is usually subtle and develops slowly over many years, which is why most people never notice it directly. This shift is sometimes described by researchers as low-grade metabolic acidosis. Unlike severe acidosis seen in advanced kidney disease, this form is much milder. Blood pH may remain technically within the normal range, but the buffering systems that maintain that balance are working harder than they once did. Over time, that extra strain can influence several important physiological systems. Studies have shown that chronic low-grade acidosis can encourage the body to break down muscle proteins in order to release buffering compounds. At the same time, bone tissue may release calcium and phosphate to help neutralize excess acid, gradually contributing to bone mineral loss. In addition, the kidneys themselves can experience increased stress when constantly managing higher acid loads. These processes are slow and often invisible in the early stages, but they accumulate over decades. That is why nephrology researchers have become increasingly interested in strategies that reduce the daily acid burden placed on the kidneys. One of the most widely studied approaches involves alkalizing compounds, substances that help buffer acidity and support the body's natural pH regulation systems. Interest in alkalizing compounds increased significantly after several clinical studies began examining whether reducing acid load could influence kidney health over time. One of the most frequently cited investigations in this area was a randomized controlled trial that followed patients with chronic kidney disease who also showed signs of metabolic acidosis. In the study, researchers divided participants into two groups. One group continued receiving standard medical care, while the other group received oral sodium bicarbonate supplementation in addition to their usual treatment. The difference in outcomes over time was striking. Patients receiving bicarbonate showed a significantly slower decline in kidney function compared with those in the control group. The rate at which filtration capacity deteriorated was reduced, suggesting that lowering the acid burden on the kidneys allowed them to function more efficiently for longer periods. Researchers believe the mechanism involves more than simple acid neutralization. When the kidneys are exposed to high acid loads, the microscopic structures responsible for filtering blood can experience increased inflammation and stress. By reducing that acid load, bicarbonate appears to decrease this internal strain. These findings have been influential enough that modern nephrology guidelines now recommend addressing metabolic acidosis in certain kidney patients using alkali therapy when bicarbonate levels fall below a specific threshold. However, bicarbonate is not the only compound capable of supporting the body's acid-base balance. Another compound that has attracted significant attention in kidney research is citrate. Citrate occurs naturally in many fruits, particularly citrus fruits such as lemons, oranges, and grapefruits. In the body, citrate plays several important roles, especially in the regulation of mineral balance within the kidneys. One of the most well-documented effects of citrate involves the prevention of calcium kidney stones. When urine becomes too concentrated or acidic, calcium and oxalate molecules can combine and form microscopic crystals. Over time, these crystals may grow into stones that cause pain and damage within the urinary tract. Citrate acts as a natural defense against this process. It binds to calcium in the urine before crystals have the chance to form. By attaching to calcium molecules, citrate keeps them dissolved in the fluid of the urine instead of allowing them to combine with oxalate and create solid structures. Large reviews of clinical trials have shown that citrate supplementation can significantly reduce the recurrence of kidney stones in individuals who are prone to them. Because of this evidence, potassium citrate is frequently prescribed as part of the standard medical treatment for people who suffer from repeated stone formation. But citrate's benefits extend beyond stone prevention. When citrate is metabolized by the liver, it contributes to the production of bicarbonate, which helps support the body's overall acid-base balance. To understand why acid-base balance may influence more than kidney health, researchers have also examined how pH levels affect the environment surrounding cancer cells. Nearly a century ago, the German biochemist Otto Warburg observed a metabolic pattern that now bears his name, the Warburg effect. He discovered that many cancer cells rely heavily on a process called glycolysis to produce energy, even when oxygen is available. This is unusual because healthy cells typically generate most of their energy through mitochondrial respiration when oxygen is present. The Warburg effect leads to an important consequence. When cancer cells rely on glycolysis, they produce large amounts of lactic acid and hydrogen ions as metabolic byproducts. These substances are pumped out of the cancer cell into the surrounding tissue. Over time, this creates an acidic microenvironment around the tumor. In healthy tissue, The pH of the extracellular environment typically ranges between 7.35 and 7.45, which is slightly alkaline. In contrast, the microenvironment around tumors can become significantly more acidic, sometimes dropping to levels closer to 6.5 or lower. Researchers believe this acidic environment provides several advantages for tumor survival. Acidic conditions can weaken certain immune responses, particularly the activity of immune cells that normally help identify and destroy abnormal cells. In addition, acidity may promote the formation of new blood vessels and help cancer cells invade surrounding tissue more easily. Now that we've explored the three systems involved: hydration, cellular metabolism, and acid-base balance, we can finally bring them together into a practical routine. What surprised many researchers studying these mechanisms is how simple the intervention actually is. The protocol begins with something most people already do every morning: drinking water. The difference lies in how that water is prepared. Start with a glass containing 400 to 500 milliliters of room temperature water. Temperature matters slightly. Extremely cold water can slow gastric emptying and reduce absorption speed, while room temperature water tends to move through the digestive system more smoothly. To this water, add the juice of half a fresh lemon. Fresh lemon provides natural citrate, which can help support kidney function and contribute to the body's buffering systems that regulate acid balance. Next, add approximately 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, which is sodium bicarbonate. This small amount introduces bicarbonate ions that assist the body's natural buffering mechanisms. Finally, include magnesium, ideally in a form that is well absorbed, such as magnesium glycinate or magnesium citrate. The drink is best consumed within 10 to 15 minutes of waking, before coffee, breakfast, or other beverages. This timing allows the body to benefit from hydration, while the early morning metabolic window we discussed earlier is still active. When people begin this routine, the most common mistake is starting with doses that are too high. Magnesium, in particular, can cause digestive discomfort if introduced too quickly. It's better to begin with a smaller amount and increase gradually as your body adapts. Another mistake is skipping the lemon but keeping the bicarbonate. Without citrate, you lose an important part of the kidney supporting effect. Timing also matters. Drinking the mixture and immediately eating breakfast can shorten the metabolic window we discussed earlier. Ideally, allow at least 20 minutes between the drink and your first meal so the body can complete this morning transition naturally. As with any health intervention, safety and realistic expectations are important. This routine is designed as general wellness support, not a treatment for medical conditions. Individuals with advanced kidney disease, heart failure requiring sodium restriction, or those taking medications that affect electrolyte balance should consult their physician before beginning. Changes from this protocol are typically gradual. In the first weeks, many people simply notice better hydration and fewer muscle cramps if magnesium levels were low. Improvements in metabolic markers or blood pressure, when they occur, usually appear over months rather than days. The goal is not a quick transformation, but a slower and healthier aging trajectory. The most important idea behind this protocol is not that it performs miracles. Lemon, magnesium, and bicarbonate will not erase disease overnight or reverse decades of aging in a few weeks. Biology rarely works that way. What small, consistent interventions can do is change the direction of long-term processes. By improving hydration after sleep, supporting cellular energy pathways, and easing the acid burden placed on the kidneys, the body gains slightly more capacity for repair and balance each day. Over months and years, those small advantages accumulate. And sometimes, the habits that make the biggest difference are also the simplest to maintain. If there is one thing I hope you take away from this discussion, it is that understanding the mechanisms behind health changes how we think about daily habits. When you know what happens during sleep, how hydration influences hormones, and how minerals support cellular repair, even simple routines begin to make more sense. Information alone does not change biology, consistent action does. Small adjustments practiced every day can gradually shift how the body manages stress, metabolism, and repair. If this exploration of aging biology was useful to you, share your biggest takeaway or remaining question. Your curiosity helps guide the topics we investigate next. This morning routine is only one small part of a much larger picture. The biology of aging is influenced by many interconnected systems: nutrition, sleep quality, physical activity, gut health, and the way our metabolism responds to daily stress. Researchers now understand that these systems rarely act in isolation. What you drink, eat, and do in the first hours of the day can influence how your body manages energy, inflammation, and cellular repair for the rest of the day. In the next discussion, we'll explore another system that quietly shapes the aging process: the gut microbiome and its connection to brain health and longevity. The science of aging is evolving quickly, and many of the mechanisms we discuss today are still being explored by researchers around the world. Each year, new studies reveal how seemingly small biological signals, hydration status, mineral balance, metabolic timing, can influence long-term health trajectories. What matters most is learning to interpret this information carefully and apply it in practical ways. If today's discussion helped you better understand how the body works after 50, keep exploring these topics. The more we understand the biology behind everyday habits, the easier it becomes to make choices that support resilience, longevity, and overall metabolic health. Before we finish, remember something important about health research. Real biological change rarely comes from a single dramatic intervention. More often, it comes from small, consistent signals repeated day after day. The body is constantly adapting to the environment we create through our habits: how we sleep, how we hydrate, what we eat, and how we manage stress. When those signals support balance, repair systems work more efficiently. The goal is not perfection. It is simply to move the body's trajectory slightly in the right direction. Sometimes the most powerful health strategies are also the simplest to practice every morning. As we close this discussion, I want to leave you with one simple idea. Stay curious about your own biology. The human body is remarkably adaptive, and even small changes in daily habits can influence how it repairs, protects, and regulates itself over time. The goal is not to chase every new health trend. It is to understand the mechanisms behind what actually works and apply that knowledge in a consistent, practical way. If this topic was helpful to you, continue exploring the science of aging and preventive health. Each piece of understanding helps you make more informed decisions about how to support your body for the years ahead. When we step back and look at the bigger picture, one pattern becomes clear. The body is constantly responding to signals from our daily habits. Hydration, mineral balance, meal timing, sleep cycles, and stress levels all send information to the systems that regulate metabolism, hormones, and cellular repair. None of these signals acts alone. They interact continuously, shaping how efficiently the body maintains itself over time. This is why small routines practiced consistently can gradually influence the trajectory of aging. The morning protocol we discussed today is not meant to replace medical care or act as a cure for disease. Instead, it is an example of how understanding basic physiology can help guide practical decisions in everyday life. When hydration improves, hormonal stress signals may stabilize. When minerals like magnesium are sufficient, cellular energy systems function more smoothly. And when the body's buffering systems are supported, organs such as the kidneys may face less cumulative strain. Over years, these subtle advantages can help the body maintain balance for longer. One of the most empowering things about learning the biology behind everyday health habits is that it changes how we think about our routines. When we understand the mechanisms, how hydration affects hormones, how minerals support cellular energy, and how the body maintains its internal balance, simple actions begin to feel more meaningful. Instead of following advice blindly, we begin to see the logic behind it. Science rarely offers instant solutions, but it does provide something just as valuable: clarity. It shows us how small biological systems interact and how our daily choices influence those systems over time. The routine we discussed today is a good example of that principle. It is simple, inexpensive, and grounded in mechanisms that researchers continue to study. The goal is not to chase perfection or dramatic results. It is to support the natural processes your body already performs every day: hydration, repair, and metabolic balance, so that those systems can continue working efficiently as the years pass. At the end of the day, the purpose of understanding these biological mechanisms is not to make life more complicated. It is actually the opposite. When science clarifies how the body works, it often reveals that some of the most effective health strategies are also the simplest. Drinking water shortly after waking, ensuring adequate mineral intake, and supporting the body's natural buffering systems are not dramatic interventions. They are small adjustments that align daily habits with the body's existing physiology. Over time, the body responds to these signals. Hormones stabilize more easily, metabolic pathways operate with fewer interruptions, and the organs responsible for maintaining balance can perform their tasks with less strain. Healthy aging rarely comes from one single action. It develops through consistent patterns repeated over many years. When those patterns support the body's natural repair systems, the cumulative effect can be significant even if each individual step seems small. As we finish this discussion, it's worth remembering that the science of aging is still evolving. Every year, researchers uncover new insights about how metabolism, cellular repair, and organ function change over time. What once seemed like isolated systems are now understood as deeply interconnected networks that respond to daily habits and environmental signals. The ideas we explored today, hydration after sleep, magnesium's role in cellular energy, and the balance between acids and buffers in the body, are just a small part of this larger picture. But they illustrate an important principle. When we understand the biology behind everyday routines, we gain the ability to support the body more intentionally. Healthy aging is rarely about dramatic transformations. More often, it is the result of small, informed choices practiced consistently over many years. And sometimes, the first step toward better health begins with something as simple as the way we start the morning. Understanding the biology behind these processes is valuable, but the real impact comes when that knowledge is translated into simple, consistent actions. The body responds continuously to the signals we provide through our daily routines. Hydration, nutrient availability, sleep quality, and metabolic timing all shape how efficiently the body can maintain balance. What makes the morning routine we discussed so interesting is that it aligns with natural physiological rhythms. After several hours of sleep, the body is already in a state of repair and metabolic adjustment, providing hydration, supporting mineral balance, and allowing the body a short window before the first meal can help reinforce those natural processes. None of this replaces professional medical care, and it does not promise dramatic results overnight. Instead, it reflects a broader principle found throughout preventive medicine. Small improvements repeated consistently can shift long-term health outcomes. When we understand how the body works, even everyday habits can become tools that support resilience and longevity. One of the most important lessons from modern health research is that aging is not driven by a single process. Instead, it emerges from the interaction of many systems: metabolism, inflammation, cellular repair, hormone regulation, and the way organs adapt over time. The routine we explored today touches only a few of these systems, but it illustrates how everyday habits can influence biological pathways that operate quietly beneath the surface. Hydration affects hormonal signaling, mineral balance influences cellular energy production, and acid-base regulation shapes how organs maintain stability. When these systems are supported, the body often maintains balance more effectively. This is why understanding the mechanisms behind health recommendations matters. It allows us to move beyond trends and focus on strategies grounded in physiology and research. As new studies continue to deepen our understanding of aging, the most powerful approach will likely remain the same: small, informed choices practiced consistently, supporting the natural repair systems the body already relies on.